Welcome to episode 3 of the Mail Time podcast. My name is Daniel Mail. I started Unit 11741 after October 7th to help with, Israeli soldiers with the critical need for life and death equipment that's missing on the front lines. Normally, there's a guest and we're having a discussion about issues pertaining to Israel and the Jewish world. But today I want to address an article that just came out in Yisrael Hayom from Hanan Greenwald. Okay, so I'm going to have the English translation of this, as this is an English language podcast. And it says, despite equipment shortages, the IDF has banned the acceptance of donations. Reservist fighters received outdated and non-standard equipment from the Army. Officers present at the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee responded that it would take time to address the gaps, between 6 months to a year. The IDF stated that all military units are supplied with equipment that meets standards and in quantities that match the structure and organization of ground units for combat. Now, it's important to note that the IDF does not have a procedure right now that's widely implemented in which existing equipment is actually tested. So if someone's given a helmet and it's from 1980, there's not a procedure in which the procurement or logistics of the IDF are going around and actually testing the helmets. Same thing goes for plates. Now, there might be a visual check occasionally, but there is no team that's going around from base to base and actually destroying broken equipment. It's actually a point of pride that in training, soldiers are using Tziyud Bach training equipment that's old, so that it will kind of build toughness, but that's not meant for combat. And what happened on October 7th, or after October 7th, is that there was a lack of necessary equipment, and this stuff was put into use. So you had unsafe equipment openly being used on multiple fronts. And tens of millions of dollars of donations came in to help fill the gap. That doesn't fix the problem that this gap exists, and there's no way to actually test it. The IDF and our sources there have shown no indication that there's actually a helmet testing facility in the IDF. So I'm not really sure how the spokesperson's unit and how the members of the military could say that it meets the standards and quantities if they don't actually have a way to test the standard. So it continues. In a recent closed discussion at the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, IDF representatives were asked about the equipment situation for reservists. A year after the war began, Knesset members sought to understand the status and whether there were gaps. The officers responded that it would take time to close these gaps, between 6 months to a year. So we're sitting here in October 2024 and being told that allegedly the gaps will be filled between 6 months to a year. So there's a three-front war with physical soldiers on the ground: Gaza, Lebanon, Judea, and Samaria. And the families of these soldiers and these soldiers are supposed to say, okay, I'm going to wait 6 months to a year for proper equipment to come, allegedly. Mind you that on October 9th, Daniel Hagari, spokesperson of the IDF, said that all of the equipment was set and there was no need for donations. If you want to help with something like barbecues or something like that, that it would be nice, but it's not necessary. So the credibility is not there for the IDF when they speak about these things, yet they're talking as if you shouldn't worry because in 6 months to a year, allegedly, the equipment will show up. What does that mean for soldiers on October 9th? That means that there are tens of thousands of soldiers that are not given the proper equipment from the Army, from the proper channels, and they are put in unnecessary risk. And the Army is admitting this. In the months following October 7th, the phenomenon of donations was massive. Diaspora communities contributed money and equipment, which went directly to reservists who received outdated and inadequate gear from the IDF. I want to pause for a second. It also is a major problem in Sadir units. Sadir units are regular conscription. They might have better equipment because the Army does have some very limited numbers, but it does not explain away the fact that there's a significant portion of the gear in the IDF that is outdated. I can tell you we have given minimum $6 million worth of equipment just for Sadir units. Helmets, vests, plates, and other items that are life and death. And the Army tried to hide behind the excuse saying that there were so many reservists that showed up that they couldn't handle the volume. This is a misnomer because they couldn't handle the volume of Sadir soldiers that needed to be in combat. And they were missing immense numbers of things. Just last week, for an elite unit, we replaced, Unit 11741 replaced ceramic plates from 2006 for regular conscription Sadir soldiers. So it's just very important that when these kinds of lies are put out there, that we counter them and say, this is just not the case. So the article continues. A few months ago, the IDF decided to halt this flow and prohibited the acceptance of donations, partly due to non-standard and sometimes dangerous equipment that reaches the fighters. The approach led by Ground Forces Commander Major General Tamir Idai is that the Army must provide the necessary equipment. Now, again, this is highly misleading. They speak in generalities and say that the non-standard and sometimes dangerous equipment reach the fighters. Can they provide actual examples of this equipment reaching the fighters and posing a threat to someone's life? Now, Unit 11741 has actually pulled unsafe donations off of fighters and replaced them with safe equipment. So there were some groups and some individuals who had no idea what they're doing and providing quote unquote bad donations. That absolutely happened. 100%. But that's like saying that someone got in a car accident and therefore all cars are banned from the street. There are plenty of good donations, people that were checking and making sure they meet the ballistic standard. The IDF doesn't actually check their older equipment to see if it meets the ballistic standard. So they're holding donations to a higher standard than what the IDF actually issues to the soldiers. And this is a major, major problem. So instead of providing specific examples, they speak generally and say that there's dangerous equipment that was donated. Well, Unit 11741 knows of dozens of soldiers that were either killed or injured in bad equipment during this war, and the bad equipment was provided by the IDF. There's also dozens of units that needed to get basic medical supplies donated. It was not provided by the Army. So there's no consistent standard, and the Army is just throwing things against the wall saying that donations are bad. Now, Unit 11741 can agree. Donations are bad. It's an absolute moral stain on the state of Israel and on the good name of the IDF. Donations should not be necessary. Unfortunately, this is the position that the IDF has created. So this donation phenomenon is in response to the behavior and the procurement of the IDF. So if they want to clean it up, absolutely. But the question is, are they actually working quickly to clean it up? Telling our sons, daughters, cousins, brothers-in-law, grandsons, husbands, fathers that they have to wait 6 months to a year to get proper equipment, but go on foot into Lebanon, that's not a morally acceptable answer. So we continue. The big question is what the gap is. Senior IDF officials believe that the gaps are not significant and it is mainly concerns a culture that has developed among reservist forces which encourages the acceptance of donations. On the other hand, testimonies from reservists raise questions about the equipment they receive and its quality, especially in comparison to regular soldiers. Well, look, are there soldiers, Sadir, regular service, and reservist Miluim that ask for crazy things? Flat screen televisions, PlayStations? Absolutely. And you know what people tell them, by and large? Take a hike. I'm sorry, but you're in the Army, and we are still missing critical equipment. So there are soldiers that ask for crazy things. That said, these soldiers are asking for basic life-saving equipment to protect their eyes, to protect their hearing, to protect their heart, to protect their head. And it's absolutely insulting to level these allegations against these soldiers. They're asking for basic life-saving equipment. And Tamir Yadai and the leadership of the IDF did not act quickly enough to figure this out. And they still haven't figured it out. And yet they throw this dirt on the brave soldiers who are on the front lines. One who frequently addresses this issue and does not hide his sharp criticism is Knesset member Moshe Tur Paz in Yesh Atid. He is a reserve lieutenant colonel and spent a significant portion of the initial months of the war in uniform. As the deputy speaker of the Knesset, a member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and a reservist officer, he receives numerous inquiries from the soldiers and commanders reporting significant gaps. Last week, he toured the Gaza border in the north and again heard these gaps. He describes the IDF's claims that the gaps are small as, quote, disconnected, and in more colorful language says, quote, they're living in a movie. This is absolutely true. Just yesterday, Unit 11741 replaced a helmet from 1980. This is before the first Lebanon War, which occurred in 1982. So you had a helmet that is over 40 years old, still being in use on a soldier being sent into a dangerous combat area. And the other point, which is not small, if you're an IDF soldier in uniform anywhere in Israel, it's important you have proper equipment because you have a target on your back walking around in that green uniform. There are terrorists, as we saw in Jaffa last week. It's important that soldiers are given proper equipment. There can't be a standard. So if there's literally a grenade flying at your face, then you get a proper helmet and vest. The standard has to be that if you're wearing a green uniform and you could potentially be called to do something that requires you to put your life on the line, you deserve basic equipment that is safe. It can't be that if someone gets pulled over on the street in New York, Florida, California, that the police officer is wearing better equipment than someone who's fighting Hamas and Hezbollah in the IDF. A joke last year when there were all the protests on college campus was that the police officers who were removing the tents and removing the protesters had safer equipment than some IDF soldiers. This is a major problem. To continue, quote, in southern Lebanon and the Gaza Strip, reservist fighters entered with equipment that is significantly inferior compared to the regular battalions. I have a friend, a doctor in one of the Golani battalions, who says that they have amazing equipment, but the reservist battalion he served in doesn't even have half of that. The reservists are stuck in the 90s, while the regular battalions are in 2024. So my disagreement with Moshe Tur Paz is that I don't think that all of the regular battalions are in 2024. If you were to actually look at the source of where they got their equipment, if they have perfect equipment across the entire pluga, across the entire unit, you're going to see there's a ton of donations, and it's a major issue. Some of the battalions or some of the units that we've helped on the Sadir level, Maglan, Egoz, Nachal, Golani, Givati, Kfir, Tzanchanim. This is not strictly a reservist problem, and don't let anybody tell you that it's strictly a reservist problem. It's just not true. In the book, MK on Night Duty, a War Diary, published by Sela Meir, recently released, he describes a discussion with the senior officer where the gap became clear. Quote, what do you want us to do? Equip a reservist battalion like a regular one, the officer, a brigadier general asks. I said no. I expect you to equip it better because their physical fitness is lower alongside an endless willingness. According to Tur Paz, they come to the IDF without any reservations, and the Army doesn't provide them with the best equipment that the regular soldiers have. Again, it's not just the reservists, it's also the regular soldiers, but the same people that Tamir Yadai and other members of the Army leadership are tarring and saying that they're just asking for nonsensical things. These are the people that are fighting like lions on the front lines. These are the people leaving their wives, their kids behind, their jobs, their communities, and coming and saying, we're going to defend the land of Israel. And it's the Army leadership that's targeting them, saying they can't have the safer equipment because they have to wait for the proper channel, et cetera, et cetera. It's absolutely unacceptable, and it's a moral stain on the fabric of the state of Israel and of the leadership of the IDF. And if we don't call things out clearly, then there's going to be moral confusion. It's important to know that these soldiers are doing everything they can to help defend the state of Israel and the Jewish people, and the army leadership is not only insulting them, but unnecessarily putting their lives at risk because they're not allowing them to get proper equipment. It's also worth noting the majority, strong majority of the army, the soldiers on the ground, the commanders, are just ignoring Tamir Yadai and the other people because they realize they don't have their safety interests top of mind. And the commanders and the soldiers on the field want to make sure that their brothers and sisters in arms come back whole in one piece, and we can prevent as many injuries as possible. So these quote-unquote orders are just being ignored. The IDF spokesperson's response. Over the past year, a program has been implemented by the ground forces to reduce the equipment gaps. Well, pause for 1 second. On October 9th, they said there were no gaps. And for close to 9 to 10 months, they maintained that there were no gaps. Now, magically, the spokesperson unit says there's gaps. That's, at least I guess maybe we could say, progress. To reduce the equipment gaps between regular and reservist units. The program is expected to conclude by 2025. All military units are supplied with equipment that meets standards and in quantities that match the structure and organization of ground units for combat. I asked people in the Army if they had a ballistic test for the helmets from 1979. Nobody has seen one. The only ballistic test that I have for those helmets, the ones that we conducted, every single helmet from then failed. 1979, 1986, they all failed the modern ballistic test. So when the Army talks about standards and quantities, it should be taken as a grain of salt because they're still issuing equipment that's unsafe according to the new standard. And it's important to note again, the Army has yet to issue a recall on these clearly unsafe pieces of equipment. So there's been no recall, and the Army is continuing to send soldiers into Gaza, Lebanon, Judea, and Samaria with unsafe equipment. All military units supply equipment that meets standards and quantities that match the structure and organization of ground units for combat. Among other things, the IDF is working to ensure that the donations received undergo the required checks in a systematic process, both regarding the quality of the equipment and its suitability for its purpose, as well as ensuring the required safety standards. The Army does not have a helmet testing facility in Israel, as far as Unit 11741 knows. Ceramic plates, they are not offering the side protection as standard part of the uniform. That's important to note. Why? Great question. Also, level 4 plates are better positioned for the munitions that are being used by Hezbollah and Hamas. And is the IDF insisting on soldiers having level 4 plates? That's a question that they need to answer. It's completely crazy that the IDF would come out and say that donations received undergo the required checks in a systematic process. What is that process? What are the checks? What are the standards? If you ask people in the Misrad HaBitachon or in the IDF what the standard is, they say, the standard is these companies. So you say, no, what is it about these companies that makes it particularly safe? And the answer is, well, it has to come from these companies. So it's a complete non-answer that is leaving soldiers with the bag financially and from a safety and security perspective. So the soldiers are being asked to either fundraise, look for donations. If you speak English, you basically have to be the assistant to the RASAP because you have to try to reach out to diaspora communities to get donations. And it's absolutely immoral to ask soldiers to wait 6 to 12 months and also ban the donations. If you can't get the equipment in a timely fashion, get out of the way and let donors take care of it like Unit 11741. Unit 11741 is not asking to retire just yet. We're just saying, get out of the way, let us do our thing to help ensure the safety of the soldiers. And instead, the IDF is putting out half-truths and misleading information to keep the public at bay. But the fact of the matter is there needs to be top to bottom investigation into who's making these decisions and why soldier safety is not the absolute priority when it comes to equipment, when it comes to donations, and when it comes to making sure that everyone has the best possible equipment immediately. Unit 11741 will not stand idly by. We're going to continue to do this, and we'll continue to call out half-truths and misleading fake news when it's published.